It has been 7 long years since we last saw an update to the XTR drivetrain, and in the meantime, SRAM has been busy. They've released not 1, but 2 iterations of their wireless drivetrain, but at long last, Shimano has responded. We have wireless XTR now. Mike and I have both been riding it for the past couple months, and we're going to report today some of our findings, how it compares, and who we think the drivetrain is for.
And to do that, we're here in Squamish. We've got 2 bikes, pretty identical setup. One has Shimano's XTR 12-speed wireless stuff. The other one has SRAM's XX Axis Eagle transmission drivetrain. They both sit in the same tier. The bikes should ride almost identical. Dario is going to run through a series of tests, things like sudden uphills, where you get to really see what it's like to go up or down the cassette really quickly. We're also going to do some chain slap noise tests. We're going to do shifting under load, a couple other things, just so you can get a good idea of how this stuff handles out in the real world.
Just one sec. That's all well and good, but before we get into the tests, I want to talk quickly about some of the tech behind new XTR. So, first and foremost, most obvious, it's wireless. That's pretty sweet, convenient, fancy, but there are some key points to the derailleur and the shifter that I want to touch on. First and foremost, it does not use any fancy attachment. You just thread it right into a derailleur hanger. Shimano chose to do this because they think it makes the system as a whole more durable. The derailleur is stronger than the hanger, therefore you have one sacrificial element that this can pivot around, and you can replace the hanger if it gets bent. Number 2, no more clutch. So Shimano got rid of the shadow clutch in the new XTR and are instead using 2 springs to kind of manage chain forces. They chose to do this for 2 reasons. 1, it's more durable than a clutch. Clutches wear out. Number 2, they wanted to give the derailleur a wedge shape, which kind of keeps it more out of the way of rocks. They found that one of the main failure points on the old derailleurs was that clutch body getting knocked into things. So by making it smaller with a spring, it's more out of the way. It might not be quite as effective at keeping chain slap at bay, but it is small and it is durable. The battery is tucked inside this part of the body. It's pretty easy to get to, and I have found that the battery life is quite good. And it's a simple little thing. You can carry a spare if you need to, but I have not had it run out on trail for me yet. Otherwise, derailleur adjustment is as you're used to with a mechanical derailleur. It's got high-low adjustment and B-gap. That's how you make it work great. And in order to do trim adjustment, you go over here to the shifter. Shifter's got 1 button, 2 button, and then a 3rd. If you long hold this 3rd button, you can trim your derailleur position, like to get perfect gear placement. And then when it comes to the shifter function, it feels just like a mechanical shifter. It's got 2 levers right where you'd expect them to be. They both have dual click, or you can set it to single click if you'd prefer. You can even hold to shift all the way up the cassette if you want to. Another little nice thing about the shifter is you can adjust where these paddles sit independent of each other with a like 3mm adjustment there. So it's like a nice little elegant customizable feature. I think it's a really nice touch on here. And for now, that's all with the tech. Head over to the article for like all the nitty-gritty details, but I'm gonna kick it back to us on trail where we'll be doing some testing. Peace. We are here at the top of the first test, which is going to be the chain slap test. So I'm gonna pop both bikes off a little drop here, give them a good bottom out, and see what the drivetrain does in reaction. We'll be testing for noise, for how much the chain kind of hurls around on the bike, and in extreme circumstances, if that could even lead to dropping a chain. So here I go. Hello, Lorax. First run on the XTR for the little chain slap test. I think we're kind of similarly opinionated on this one. It's pretty noisy. Yeah. We're running like a control chain guide on these of just a piece of rubber, so you kind of get like the enhanced effect, if you will. And even with like a really good chain slap protector, the XTR is noticeably clappy. Yeah. They omitted a clutch. So you kind of...
Yeah, and what's happening is there's a spring in there. You can kind of do a little demonstration. There's a spring in here, it goes like this. And so on smaller bumps, it's pretty strong. It keeps it nice and tight, but on bigger hits, it gets pulled forward, and that spring is still springy. You can get some pretty loud noises like that.
Pronounced thwack.
Yeah.
I'd say like, so we're running both of these drivetrains on kind of control bikes as well. We have a Hightower and a Bronson. Both, I would say, have a high level of chain slap as far as...
They're the noisier bikes in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, as far as bikes go, they're like, they get a lot of drivetrain movement, but that makes them a good test case for something like this because you can kind of get the most extreme situations.
But now we should get the axis, get the transmission up there and see how that compares to kind of really get a decibel comparison. But for now, this one's on the noisier side, especially for single larger hits like that.
All right.
More slapping.
That was slappy, but I would say, again, as we mentioned, control bikes, kind of slappy. Yeah, I think transmission is certainly not immune.
It's not slap free. We can kind of do the same demonstration. But this does have a clutch in here, so if you pull it forward and back, you know, it'll still snap. You go all the way up like that, it's still gonna slap. But the force seems it's like a little bit more pronounced on the XTR than this one. There's just more resistance. It feels a little bit more, it is more damped, so it doesn't get quite that same amount of like whiplash effect. Yeah,
and I think there's like a certain type of hit that gets a wind up in both of these, and we have a lot of those at home. It's like a situation where it's a smooth trail to a really pronounced compression, and that's where you're gonna get the most significant feedback.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a jump trail with some compressions like that. So if you hit a jump, land, kind of push into a G out, that's when it's really stretching that chain and then loading it back up. Chatterier stuff, we'll kind of get some more of that later, kind of see how it is on more higher speed chatter, but yeah, for right now.
Yeah, I think that's kind of they're both, neither's perfect, but I would err towards transmission in terms of overall noise. Mike's lock ring is backwards on his grip, so we have to stop filming for the day.
All right, in the chain slap contest, I think we're gonna give the point to SRAM. There is a noticeable difference out on the trail, and while neither one is totally silent, SRAM transmission is quieter than XTR when it comes to the way that that chain moves forward and backwards.
We are now here at the shifting under power test. I'm going to attempt to pedal up a rock roll in front of us here, start in the exact same gear on both bikes, try to shift in the exact same places, get a mosquito in my eye, and then at the top, I will be talking to Mike and seeing how each drivetrain reacts to that power. Well, it gets there quickly.
Yeah, chirps away.
Chirps away. I find when you're like really putting power down with the XTR and shifting, it can protest a little bit. Like it'll kind of like rip into gear sometimes.
Yeah,
but it gets there.
But not, it gets there. It just doesn't feel quite as happy. It's not quite as solid maybe.
Yeah, but it is quicker to get there. So I think that's the trade-off, is like speed into gear versus solidness of shift.
Yeah, let's get you on the SRAM bike and then we can do a little, maybe a score at the end and see which one you feels better. But
sounds good to me.
It does shift under load. All these companies claim that they shift under load, and you can do that.
They do, in fact.
Hammer and shift.
Check out this no-foot bomby.
Dario's a free rider.
Yep, I'd say the feeling is familiar. You know, it's like, it takes a second and then just like smoothly ramps into gear. I'm really used to this feeling at this point. So for me, it's not like, it's slow. It's more like you shift, a second later it happens.
Ka-chunk.
Yeah, and under power, it's like seamless to me.
That kind of feels like it does well under power, where the Shimano, it still does well under power, but it almost doesn't feel quite as chunky. That's the word we can use. It's almost just not as precise, is the wrong word, because it does go right into gear, but it's just not as positive of a shift, I'd say. Like,
yeah, it's more, well, like, I think the difference to me is like with SRAM stuff, you like request a shift, it happens in a second really smoothly. With Shimano, it's like, boom, you're shifting, and then it like might take a sec to like rip into gear.
Yeah, I think that's the difference in the way that cassettes are designed and the way that kind of like the way the teeth profiles are. It's a little bit different, but they both do a good job of shifting under load, I'd say.
I'd say it's worth noting that like the cassette and chain with the new XTR is the same as the prior stuff. So like functionally that shift quality is going to be identical to what you're used to.
If you're already used to the existing, if you have the cable actuated Shimano stuff, you've experienced what it's like to shift under load. It's the same thing. It's just now you don't have any any wires.
All right, that was our general shift speed section with some shop time, some trail time, and then a bit of our reflection on our past few months of riding. We're gonna kick it back into the studio now, talk about the weights, the prices, and then our final impressions on the drivetrains.
Come up with a little conclusion. We'll probably get out the scoreboard and let you know what we think is the actual best, whether it's XTR or SRAM transmission. We'll let you know.
So we are here in the shop to talk about shifting speed. Now, there are some parameters to discuss here in terms of how you set the drivetrains up. So for the sake of similarity, we have set both the XTR and the transmission to their full sweep when pressed function. That means if you hold the button down, it's gonna rip all the way up the cassette as fast as it can. We will also do one pressing the button individually as quickly as we can. So two different versions of the same thing, both just illustrating how quickly you can get the derailleur to shift up the cassette and down the cassette. Within that, there are all the different gear changes that you might do on trail. So we're hoping that that kind of illustrates the point. We'll have a little clock going as we do it if you're really trying to time the gear change. So this one's for all y'all out there who need that. Let's go.
We're in our special, very scientific laboratory shift speed calculation. I think it was pretty clear Shimano is definitely faster.
Yeah. Worth noting, Shimano has 5 different speed modes you can set the derailleur to in the app, and those speed modes dictate when you hold the lever down how quickly the derailleur moves up the cassette. That was in very fast, but even in very slow, it's still faster than transmission. The neutral mode that it comes in is like a healthy middle between the two, and I think it's where most people will run it. Yeah. But most importantly, when you're just clicking the shifter, it's still moving up the cassette faster. Yeah. There's no delay, it's not fighting the cassette in any way, it's just like moving instantly and hoping that the chain catches.
Yeah, so point, Shimano. All right, we're back in the studio after some good outdoor time, testing these things, seeing how they work. We're gonna do a quick rapid fire rundown of the results of those little tests. We'll start with the very first one, chain slap noise. Overall noise, how this thing is on rough sections of trail. That point goes to?
SRAM.
Yep, it is quieter.
Yep, it's just, the clutch works a little bit better. We found that in real world riding scenarios, over the past few months, it's just noticeably a little bit quieter. It's not profoundly different, but it is a noticeable difference.
Exactly. Moving on, shifting under load. Going up a steep climb, you decide you want to shift without letting off the pedals. The one that feels the best is?
SRAM, again. It's slower, we'll get to that later, but those shifts feel a bit more intentional. It just kind of clunks into gear without any sort of slippage or funky noises. It is a bit better. And I think like if I were running it on an e-bike, I would definitely go with transmission.
Yeah, it makes you feel a little bit less guilty when you are shifting under load. They're both designed to shift under load, but I think with SRAM, you don't feel like you're getting away with something you're not supposed to. Mm-hmm. Where Shimano, something's like, ooh, I don't know if I should have done that, even though it does work, so.
Yep, there's just occasional, like, you get that like hang up, scary sensation of like, maybe I'm gonna break the chain and then it settles into gear.
Yeah. Moving on from that one, next up is shift speed, overall shift speed. You're riding down the trail, come to a sudden uphill or a sudden descent, moving from one part of the cassette further down, that one goes to?
Shimano.
Yeah, that one's very noticeable.
Yeah, the speed that you can, we have this set up in its like most neutral speed, and you can get it even faster. It's distinctly quicker.
Yeah,
they definitely biased towards that in terms of like how the system works overall.
Yeah, even just riding around a parking lot, it's one of those things, if you've been riding the transmission stuff for a while, just kind of you get used to it, but then you hop on this, on the Shimano, and riding even around a parking lot, like I said, all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's a lot faster. So.
Up next, we're gonna talk about cost and weight as kind of a combination. The price on XTR, as we've been testing it, is $1,780 US, big number, but the cost on XXSL, as we have it in comparison here, is $2,025. So XTR wins out on cost by about 245 bucks, but then weight is much closer. So total weight on our scale for XTR is 1,735 grams, while XXSL though there are some combinations that you could change. The way that we have it set up is 1,721 grams. So about 14 grams lighter for XXSL, which is still hard for me to say.
It's hard to say.
But we're gonna call this one, what do you think?
It's pretty close to a draw, depending on how you set it up. Again, like for overall weight between these two groups, using the larger cassette, the 10 to 51 or the 10 to 52, then pretty even. But if you really wanted to save weight with XTR, they do offer a 945 cassette, and that saves you a bunch of weight. So if you're looking for the absolute lightest 12-speed electronic wireless drivetrain out there, that's going to be the XTR with the shorter range derailleur.
You'll have a slightly smaller range of gears, but that smaller cassette and smaller derailleur will amount to a lighter drivetrain. The other small caveat here is the fact that you do need one of these to run XTR, so that does add about 26 grams, give or take. So slight difference in overall weight there, but we omitted the hanger from the overall weights because it depends on the frame that you're running the drivetrain on. So
lots of numbers there, but overall it is impressive that Shimano has achieved a weight that's that light, also using aluminum cranks. Remember that on the XX cranks that SRAM has, those are carbon fiber. They're also more expensive, so that's where some of this goes. You can look at all the price lists and that and do your spreadsheet comparison to figure it out, but it's impressive the weight they've achieved with that.
Yeah, we're also talking like generally the one, like there are versions of these drivetrains that you could run only on an XC bike, but these are the ones that you'd run on something you would go ride the bike park or an gnarly trail on, because Shimano does make an XC version of the crankset, as does SRAM, but we're omitting those because the goal here isn't like what's the lightest drivetrain, it's what's the best drivetrain. The final kind of category here is going to be ergonomics, durability, and livability. I think we can just kind of rattle those off pretty quickly. Ergonomics, which do you prefer?
I prefer Shimano. I really like how the shifters are super adjustable. The little paddles, each can kind of turn. It feels more like what you're used to from a traditional shifter, and I really like that. The ergonomics of the axis stuff, it's pretty basic, it works, but I just never felt like I could really fine tune it the way I could with the Shimano.
Yeah, the 2-button pod to me feels, it feels like a good digital version, but like I do really like the tactile feedback you get from the Shimano shifter. I will say the SRAM pod rocker, which is their like funny looking plastic version of this, is a close proxy, but I still think I prefer the Shimano sensation, let's say. Durability, I think for both of us, we've had a lot more time with transmission because it's been out for a couple years, where XTR we've only had
only a couple months. It's kind of too, so we can't really comment on long-term durability yet. I haven't toasted my derailleur yet. I've used 2 derailleurs so far for the last couple months, and they're both fine. Have you had any issues yet with
I've had no issues. I think kind of in the general durability thing, we've both experienced some creaking with XTR from the cassette. That's pretty typical to Shimano cassettes. If they're not like perfectly clean when assembled, if you don't have like a light amount of grease in the right places, they can get some creaking in certain gears. Though that's not like a functional durability issue, it is kind of an annoying maintenance thing you'll have to keep in mind. Overall though, I will say like I've been impressed with how out of the way the XTR stuff is. I've been running it on same bikes I've run the transmission on and have found that it does run into stuff less. It's slightly smaller in form factor.
Kind of hard to see, but the front profile, this sticks out a little bit more. This one kind of tapers. And at first, when you hear that the taper knows what it's designed for, it almost seems kind of like a gimmick, but it does seem to work. You just don't hit as much stuff, those glancing blows. This one catches a little bit more than you do with the Shimano design. Yeah,
probably like minor differences in the long term, but something to keep in mind. And then finally, livability. Kind of an intangible in that sense, but you know, what's it like to live with?
Yeah, I mean, battery life, I've been really impressed with the battery life on this. I haven't had to charge it that often. I kind of check it once in a while and it's been green more often than not.
Yeah.
But it's like, good battery life. And once it's set up, it's really simple. I think setup for both of them is pretty simple. This kind of feels more like the old traditional style where you have a B tension screw, you have a high and low limit screw. But set up, even with, I mean, the first time I set it up, I didn't have any instructions. It just kind of went by,
but it's just a derailleur.
Yeah,
it
exactly.
Not a cable.
So it's kind of simple where the axis system the transmission system is easy to set up, but you kind of have to learn a new order of operations. And the first couple times, just kind of takes a little bit of retraining your brain. So I think people are used to the way that things were in the past. They'll find the new XTR Wireless really familiar and pretty easy to get up and running.
Yeah, that's fair. I think for me, now that I'm used to both, I actually prefer the transmission setup just because there are less variables to keep in mind, especially like as you've been using it a while. Though I do like the high-low and B tension adjustment. You know, that's like something we're used to, and you know how to like hone those in. I find the omission of those is kind of nice. There's just like fewer things to focus on with transmission. So it kind of depends on what your inclination is in terms of like mechanical aptitude and what you're using the drivetrain for. But yeah, both livable. It's just a slightly different experience.
Yeah. It's like once it's set up, you're not gonna have to do it more often, or not gonna have to do it again. So it's kind of like the initial setup, and then you're good to go. For me, if I had to choose one right now, you're gonna get that "it depends" answer. And I know that always seems like a cop-out, but really it does depend, because if I was building up a lightweight XC bike or maybe a lighter trail bike, I would go with Shimano. I really like the 945 cassette. I found that it had less chain slap, really like the super fast shifting, and I think that package, it kind of fits the bill for that style of bike. But if I was building up a bigger enduro bike, I would go with the Axis transmission just because of the reduced chain slap. That's the main thing, is the reduced chain slap. I don't care as much about the shifting speed on the bigger bike if I don't have a noisy bike. So,
yeah, that's fair. Pretty similar answer. I think for me, if it were a bike that I'm riding every day, I'm gonna go with transmission. I prefer just, you can shift it like a dummy. I like that, and being able to shift like whenever you want, under power. I don't mind as much waiting a second for the gear to change. I like just having that reliability of the shift. But I will say, like, I've been spending a lot of time on the 945 XTR, and for me, that's something I can run on a bigger bike and have liked the experience.
Mr. Strong Guy over
here.
No,
I like how out of the way it is, you know? Like having run 11 speed for a long time, it's like similar to that in terms of form factor. I also really like the tightness of the gear changes, like having like consistent cadence all the way through is cool. So it depends, but I do think I'm still a big fan of the transmission experience. So, you know, I think your mileage may vary, but there's good options right now for both people from both companies.
Yeah, there's no 100% clear winner, but we have our verdict.
I would say that Shimano has done a really good job of integrating their system into a wireless alternative.
Yeah.
It's worth noting too, like cable XTR is still great. You know, you're not
cable transmission works really well too. So you don't need batteries on your bike, even though you made it through all this video up to this point for us to tell you that. But if you do want to get rid of the cables, these things work pretty well.
They do indeed. Now, if only they could agree on a battery design.
That'd be nice.
Become friends.
I know.
Maybe one day.
One day.
We have a non-capitalist utopia. But until then.
That's the new Shimano XTR. And don't forget to check out the full article on the homepage. You can dig into the exact weights, deeper ride impressions, and even more installation, what it's like to live with, all the details. And before you go there though, drop a comment, let us know what you think, which one you would pick, or if you're just sticking with the tried and true cables and housing.